All right, let's dive in. Thank you so much for attending and being part of the conversation. Really very excited to ask some questions and get into the deep dive with Bettina and see more about and learn more about her perspective. And hopefully, as a learner myself, as someone that is working with an early stage startup, can learn more about what these processes look like, especially when we're looking through pilot agreements, for example. All right, so I'm going to first start off with a very light question. I heard a rumor that in your line of work, sometimes in your peak weeks, you're working about 80 hours per week. Is that true or false?
It depends on what you're doing. I think sometimes, yes, that can be true, especially at a large firm like Fasken. But I would say most of the time it's not that extreme.
Not that extreme. Okay, good to know. Now, getting into a little bit about your journey, right? So looking at your previous experience as well as your transition into working with Fasken, there are different types of companies that you've worked with, right? And when it comes to these various companies, especially working with startups, working with founders, they work fast, they think fast, and maybe they expect their lawyers to work as fast. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah, so let me take a step back and maybe give an overview of my background. I started my, love of technology when I taught entrepreneurship at the University of Hong Kong. I've never lived in Hong Kong, I've never been there, but there was an opportunity that came up, and so I taught this undergraduate course before I went to law school. After law school, I went into law, and then I left to help scale up two startups. One was in legal tech, and one provided a CRM platform in Toronto. So I was on the management side, helped scale them up, and then I left and decided to become a commercial associate at Fasken, where my clients are primarily all founders, all startups and scale-ups, and I'm helping them with their commercial strategy, helping them go to market, right? So getting them ready so that they are equipped to offer their services and their products to the market so that they can hit revenue as fast as possible. They work fast, they take on a lot of risk. And so that's why it's so important, I think, to have that background of scaling, because the traditional law practice is not very conducive for what a startup needs, right? For example, at a stage where you're pre-seed, Series A, maybe even Series B, you don't need the Porsche of contracts. You need something that will cover 80% of the most important risks, and you need to be able to turn that around very quickly, within a day, 24 hours, right? And so those are the expectations my clients have, and so we've built around that. We operate very differently on our team than the traditional Bay Street model. And knowing that my clients have a bigger risk appetite, like that's just what it has to be. We can't drill down all the risks. We can't protect on everything. We have to prioritize and say, look, you're going to have to, be a little bit scrappy here, knowing that there's going to be indicators that come up of risk, and then we can address it then. But let's push these things down later on, because you've got to get to revenue fast.
I love that. I love hearing about it. It seems like an adrenaline rush, and I'm sure some founders here in the room can definitely resonate. And just wanted to ask, what aspects of working with these types of founders excite you the most?
The way they think. And it's so different than the way a lawyer thinks, and I love that. It's so refreshing. The founders in the room, you guys think bold, you're pushing boundaries, you are the backbone of innovation, you are the backbone of growth, and I just love the way, all of my founder clients, they see an obstacle, and they don't just think about how can we move through it, move around it, but sometimes they're like, how do we just fly over it? Or, it's just the way they think is incredible, and I love that.
I love that as well. I was just at the Thai Toronto Summit on Monday, and there was an amazing panel with Eva Lau, and they were discussing the exact same thing that you're saying, right? Founders in this day and age, the types of founders they like to work with are founders that have this undeniable belief, right? That whatever they're building is lasting, can be forever, and is a change maker. So moving into now our favorite topic, pilots, pilot agreements. So, and when it comes to pilot agreements, do they need to be structured differently from standard customer contracts?
Okay, so I have a lot to say on pilot agreements because the whole purpose of a pilot agreement is to ease you into converting it into a full-blown contract, right? When I worked internally scaling up the second startup, it's a company called Wingmate. And what I noticed time and time again was that we would run a pilot, often with a large enterprise. Like I'm talking about large telecoms, right? We would run a pilot, and then we would hit what I call pilot purgatory, where the pilot has ended. It's been 3 months. They've had access to your product or service or whatever it is, but they're not yet ready, or things are getting delayed by legals, and they haven't signed your full-blown contract. So they haven't converted, but they're still have access to either the product you gave them or the service or the software. What do? You're stuck. Do you shut them off? Do you say, hey, return to me all of the product that you have? Like, here's all of the documentation back. Like, it's a very awkward situation to be in. And then I've seen the pilot purgatory phase last 6 months, a year. This is extremely common in long-term health, by the way. If for any people in here who are targeting that area, care homes, I've seen, particularly, I'm thinking of one example where a pilot ended and 6 months later, it still has not converted, even though they got raving feedback. So there's a disconnect between a client signing on with you full term and a client liking what you're providing. Even though they like what you provide, doesn't mean they're gonna be able to convert quickly. So, and how do you get around that? What's the way to do that? Okay, there's so many mechanisms you can have in place into your pilot agreement. Okay, I'm just gonna run through like a quick bullet list of all of as much as possible, and then please find me after for more details. Quickly, number one, always have both agreements together, your full contract with the pilot agreement. Have an automatic conversion clause so that once that's done, it automatically converts into a certain period of payment, whether that's the same as the long-term contract or otherwise, so that you still get cash while they are deciding whether or not to fully commit. Have an automatic conversion where there's an opt-out rather than an actual signature to initiate the full contract, right? So what I mean that is, once the pilot ends, you automatically convert unless you tell us otherwise within 60 days, 90 days. If you continue with us, we will give you an incentive. This is the carrot, right? We'll give you either an added feature, an added support service layer, service credits, discount. These are and of course, presenting all of that together at the moment you are negotiating the pilot. Why? Psychologically, when someone is negotiating a pilot, they're thinking low risk, low stakes. It's really just 2 months, 1 month, 2 weeks, right? Whatever that amount is. They're in a different frame of mind than someone like a VP or a head of ops or whomever sitting there negotiating something that they know is going to be like a multi-year contract. So when you put both together, present it to them at the same time while you're really talking about the pilot, things just sort of, they don't get pulled and dragged down into the nitty-gritty of legals that I've seen where if you were to give it to them in 2 phases. Because otherwise the psychology is, okay, now we finished the pilot, now the real negotiation happens. Here's my giant 20-page contract, right? That's what slows things down. So have it all ready, have it streamlined, have it simple, right to the point. It can't be like a 30-page document. Cover your most important stuff, leave the rest, and have it all together from day 1. And from day 2, start building towards that streamlined conversion, right? You're gonna build in maybe weekly conversations with your client, bi-monthly conversations, so that when it comes to the last day of the pilot, they're ready. They know what they're getting into, and they're just seamlessly saying, all right, I don't have to do anything. We just keep going. For those of you with a hardware component to your product, right? I chatted with a few people, some of you do. The hardware, you can still do this, right? You can say, you know what, you continue using the hardware, you continue using the software along with it. You don't have to expand the scope for more units until, you're ready to hit that point. But until then, I'm not going to take back the units. I'm not going to switch you off. We continue going, and I still keep getting the cash.
Amazing. I was taking notes. I'm not sure. I do see a couple of people with their phones out, so 100%. All of that sounded like gold. A little couple things that I got. Always have an automatic conversion clause. Opt out versus the signature. Look, review every 60 to 90. Have a clause in there that says after 60 to 90 days, as well as definitely getting into the psychology of the negotiation. That is in itself an art. I believe you broke it down so clearly. So we'll definitely be chatting up anyone else in the room that resonates, because I think that is such an important aspect of the pre-negotiation that is missed. That's something that you've encountered with founders in the past, as well as, are there any common mistakes that you've seen when it comes to these negotiations?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so for my health tech, life sciences, med tech types of clients, what I notice that's very interesting, that's different from my typical, tech company type of founders, is a lot of these founders in this space came to what they're doing because they either have a background in science or a background or a PhD perhaps, or they've fully experienced the pain point they're trying to solve for, right? And what I see with these types of founders is that they don't take hardline negotiations. They very much are willing to concede very quickly. Maybe because they're not coming from it from a position of like, I have a background in consulting or an MBA. I understand negotiations is no big deal. For them, negotiating a contract is something very foreign. And they are motivated to help, in which case it kind of goes against them when they are in that room negotiating, where you kind of have to take off that hat a little bit and first and foremost put on your like business savvy hat. I've seen founders in this space shoot themselves in the foot because they so quickly, when given some push, they were willing to step down and give free pilots. They were willing to step back and give steep discounts, really change the structure. And those types of in-the-moment decisions they do have quite a bit of impact further on down the road, right? I've seen other founders who will say, we never run a free pilot, by the way. If you want a free pilot and that's part of your policy, we're not the ones for you. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot that goes into the setup. There's a lot of investment from us. So we never run a free pilot. If you want to work with us and you don't want to commit any money, what we can do is convert this into a design partnership or like something else. Give us there's no, proper phrase for it, but give it another label where if we're going to give you free services or something of value, you're going to give to us something of value, which is your time. You're going to meet with us every week for an hour, and we're going to drill down and get all of the feedback. We're going to watch you, how you use our platform. We're going to be on site and see how things operate. You're going to open up your doors to us. That's what you get if you want my services for free. Otherwise, you go with our standard paid pilot, right? That type of position where if you in your head say, sorry, we just don't do things for free, you'd be shocked at how often that actually is very well received, because that signals a founder that knows the value of what they're providing, has done this before, and has the indicators that you'll be successful. Because the last thing a client wants to do is invest the time purchasing your product, your software, knowing that there's a risk that 9 out of 10, startups might fail, and then they have to do this all over again. So those indicators of your sophistication in this arena actually really help you in your negotiations.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. So again, as I said, just too much gold. Just one of the things that stood out to me is when you really emphasized the importance of doubling down as a founder, right? Sticking to your guns and being proud of what you've developed, what you're looking to develop in the future. That is something that I've seen as well in founders, is something that a lot of people will resonate with, especially the VCs in the room, right? Because you don't want to work with somebody that will be swayed by all the different information or inputs from various ecosystem players, right? At the end of the day, if you're building something that you believe is going to be lasting, stick to it, right? So we're going to move a little bit into a hot topic over here, pricing. So when a startup stands to gain strategic value from a pilot, how do you advise founders to approach pricing conversations? And when I ask this question specifically, we're looking at timing the conversation, pricing strategies, as well as the duration of the specific agreement. So I know you've covered a high level, but diving a little deeper into those little nuances, I think can offer some value to the crowd in the room.
Okay. So my clients are mostly they're AI startups. I think probably a lot of people here are doing the same thing, AI backed, and which means that they defer and default to a SaaS model, right? Which is your subscription type of model. I do have other clients in all types of business models. I've got one client who's deep tech, and one output that his platform is able to produce will create millions of dollars of value for their end client, in which case a SaaS model doesn't make sense for them, right? So in terms of pricing, this can be like a whole weekend workshop. I'll start with just the SaaS type of model and what to consider. And then for anything else outside of that, I think maybe like please chat with me, because there's just so many different other buckets for me to really be helpful here in this short amount of time. So if you are doing a SaaS model, right? And let's say you are working with long-term care homes. I've seen SaaS models work out really well where the pricing is variable based on the number of beds. I've seen that work out very well. You can do that differently. You can do it based on number of facility and have a fixed fee per facility, or you can do a general broad enterprise fixed number. I think clients like feeling like it's variable so that they're not paying more than what they need. Because if you're offering a service, let's say to a long-term care home, right? Like likely the services that you're offering does correlate with how many residents that place has, right? The more residents, the more reporting incidents and documentation. And so that's a natural fit. In terms of other pricing strategy, now from a pilot to a full conversion, something that works out, I think, haven't seen it backfire yet, is pricing the pilot with a higher cost than your full contract. Because the way you should think about it is everything is a sliding scale and everything is negotiable, okay? So the cheaper the cost that your client wants, well, that means the higher risk, like that they're going to have to take on. The higher the cost they're willing to pay, the less risk they're going to take on. One easy, obvious example is if I am your client and I want to sign on with you for 5 years and I'm locking in and we're getting a binding contract for 5 years, I've really de-risked your operations, which means I should really get a sweetheart deal, as opposed to someone who's saying, I only want to be with you maybe on a month to month. They're not willing to take on any of that risk. They've shifted it on to you, which means you've got to price it in. Everything can be priced in. So if someone is taking on less and less risk and making less and less of a commitment to you, that price should go up, and vice versa. It's also a great incentive for someone to convert from a pilot into a full contract where you can show them, hey, your monthly costs, your every invoice is actually going to go down once you convert. So let's get you converted faster than staying on our, interim arrangement.
Thank you. So just to add a little bow to what you just explained, just want to make sure I got this right. Price the pilot at a higher cost, and everything is a sliding scale and negotiable.
Yeah.
Correct?
So again, this all really depends on your business and what's going on. This might not be the general advice that fits everyone, right? It's something to think about. And if you want to really see how well it would fit for your business, like we should chat about it. Terms of payment, like what do you mean in terms of? Exactly. Exactly, right? The value of money, right? Getting that cash up front is extremely valuable. Getting that revenue in through the doors is extremely valuable. It's a great signal for investors, right? As the faster you are to revenue, the faster you are to profitability, just everything else gets easier from there.
No, makes sense. So concluding pilots, what can founders do to ensure there's limited friction and conflict relating to the customer relationship and customer agreements post signing?
Okay. This has really nothing to do with legals. This is more of a practical experience I've seen from the inside, is having a regular cadence, especially when you're early stage, having a regular cadence where you meet with your clients every month, maybe every 2 weeks, where that's just booked ahead and you're not ad hoc trying to get someone's time. Where I see things kind of spiral downhill are, let's say you're working with family physicians, right? These individuals, like, getting 15 minutes of their time is so incredibly challenging. I've seen so many deals die on the table because even though the users of whatever service love it, the ultimate decision maker is that physician, but that physician is still practicing, which means they're just booked up nonstop, which means they need to give the sign on, but you never really get their time to convince them. And they just default to what they know best, which is, let's just hire more admin staff. Let's just keep struggling along for as long as physically possible. Really, really challenging. So once you have a successful conversion, and even like during the pot, you should be, if they're willing to hand you money, you should be saying, like, our standard operating process is we meet every 2 weeks. I'm just going to put in 20 minutes in your calendar every 2 weeks. That's just our cadence. You can cancel if you can't make it, no problem, but it's going in your calendar for the next 6 months. It's booked, okay? And that's our opportunity to make sure everything's going smoothly. Once you get that real feedback, you'll be able to catch things before they snowball into bigger problems. But the hardest thing to do is actually getting someone's attention and their time, especially in this space. So whatever you can do to front load it while motivation is high, people are excited to work with this cool new company, front load all of that and get all those commitments in there right away.
I love that. So get those SOPs right off the bat, and make sure that as you enter into these negotiations and as you engage with your clients, really set that standard, right?
Yeah,
set that standard
exactly.
right off the bat.
Exactly.
All right. And our last question: when should a founder or startup walk away from a pilot or negotiation? When do they walk away? When's the time?
Okay. It's a really hard one to answer because there's so many variables, okay? So there's 2 buckets of how you can think about this. There's the short term and then there's the long term. You might be in a situation where you have to prioritize short-term cash flow. And even though you know it's not the right fit and they're likely going to churn within the next 6 months, you know that there might be some pressing reason where you absolutely just need that revenue through the door. Let's say you're about to close and or you're about to go fundraise, and just having this contract signed is going to be a really big deal. So those considerations are going to be very different than if you're not in that situation and you're really thinking more about the long-term success, right? So there's no right or wrong answer here, but just some things to consider. 1, if the client is not yet ready for you, right? You can tell when they're not ready for you. They don't have the infrastructure in place. They don't have the buy-in from their team. Their current workflows are so different to what you're trying to do, or their data is in such bad shape, right? There's all kinds of indicators where they're just not yet at that level of sophistication or ability or resource ability for you to then be able to succeed with them. especially if you are operating like a platform that relies on their data, your stuff is highly dependent on how good their data is. I've seen a lot of contracts fail because that client just was not yet at that level where they could properly get the value out of what you're offering. And they churn for no good reason other than they're just a year or 2 years too early, or they didn't get the internal buy-in yet. But again, so if you're optimizing for like, I want these types of contracts to be in place for, the 2 years, 5 years, then that's something to consider where now, you don't want to take hits on your churn and all that stuff. Again, different situation than if you just need that quick win for the next 3 months or 6 months and whatever comes through the door, you're willing to take. So really different considerations. But if you can tell that they're not yet resource ready for you, you might actually be going down a rabbit hole of distracting yourself. These clients typically need a lot more hand-holding because they don't have the stuff in place to take advantage of what you're offering. And so then they're not getting the ROI, you're not getting the long-term benefit.
So it's really important to make sure that that client, yes, maybe they're giving you a lot of attention, maybe they seem so interested in what you're building, but really identifying and ensuring as the founder that that client is in the correct buying position to take advantage of what you're offering, right? So, and that is the end of our fireside chat, but we're going to open it up to the rest of the room. Can we all give a big round of applause for Bettina? Amazing. All right, so does anyone have any questions for her? Anyone in the room at all? Yes.
Thank you so much. Sorry, it must be the weather, summertime. So I had a question about Canadian privacy law. So Canadian privacy law was designed before large-scale AI existed.
Yeah.
And in health, you practice in that gap like every day, I'm assuming. So I wanted to know, what does your work show you that law has not caught up to yet when it comes to this gap?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So, oh my goodness, I could ramble on for years about this. You mentioned Canadian privacy law, especially in health. This is something that you'll likely all run into. Under PIPA, which is the legislation that governs personal health information, it is very strict, and it also applies to long-term care homes, by the way. So if you are operating in that space, that information, you're also part of that legislation. Anyway, so health information, there's a lot of strict guardrails around. You need consent in order for you to even access it, collect it, work with it, do what you need to do with it. However, you're not the one on the ground going to each patient or individual or resident getting their active consent. You have to rely on your client to get those consents for you. And the consent is extremely strict because consent is only valid if it's tied to the purpose for collecting that information. So what that means is, if you are running an AI platform, something you are going to want to do, and you really should be able to, is improve your models, improve your product based on the data that you're gathering, right? Make improvements. However, if that purpose is not stated in the consent that your client got, you are not allowed to do that. And your client is not incentivized to go and rewrite their consent documents. They're not incentivized to go and help you get this added bonus. So I've seen a lot of my clients kind of get hamstrung here. And it's very restrictive in the age of AI, where it's like your product is only as good as the model underlying it. You need to be able to train and move quickly. The workaround is that anything that is anonymized or de-identified, that is irreversibly anonymized or de-identified, is outside the scope of that legislation. So if it is that irreversibly, so that's the only kind of like little out. Doesn't work when it's video or imaging, because how do you irreversibly anonymize video footage of an individual to detect, facial and body movements before they're about to have a fall, while stripping anything personally identifying from that video and yet having it be accurate enough to then train your model? It's virtually impossible. That's just sort of the state we're in, where it's really, really challenging for you to broadly use data to help improve your services. There are things you can do, but yeah, that's one of the ways where I think as in Canada, I think also like in the US, we're very optimized for privacy rights and protections, which directly cuts against the fast speed of AI and tech. They're a little bit pulling in different directions.
Thank you.
Thanks.